ever since I have known you. You brought your adoration and your portmanteau here together. Told me! Why, you have always told me all day long. When you told me your own story, you told me plainly that you began adoring her the first time you saw her, when you were very young indeed. Very well, then, said I, to whom this was a new and not unwelcome light. I have never left off adoring her, and she has come back, a most beautiful and most elegant creature, and I saw her yesterday, and if I adored her before, I now doubly adore her. Lucky for you, then, Handel, said Herbert, that you are picked out for her and allotted to her. Without encroaching on forbidden ground, we may venture to say that there can be no doubt between ourselves of that fact. Have you any idea yet of Estella's views on the adoration question? I shook my head gloomily. Oh, she is thousands of miles away from me, said I. Patience, my dear Handel, time enough, time enough. But you have something more to say? I am ashamed to say it, I returned, and yet it's no worse to say it than to think it. You call me a lucky fellow. Of course I am. I was a blacksmith's boy but yesterday. I am. What shall I say I am today? Say a good fellow if you want a phrase, returned Herbert, smiling and clapping his hand on the back of mine. A good fellow, with impetuosity and hesitation, boldness and diffidence, action and dreaming curiously mixed in him. I stopped for a moment to consider whether there really was this mixture in my character. On the whole, I by no means recognized the analysis, but thought it not worth disputing. When I ask what I am to call myself today, Herbert, I went on, I suggest what I have in my thoughts. You say I am lucky. I know I have done nothing to raise myself in life, and that fortune alone has raised me. That is being very lucky. And yet, when I think of Estella— And when don't you, you know? Herbert threw in, with his eyes on the fire, which I thought kind and sympathetic of him. Then, my dear Herbert, I cannot tell you how dependent and uncertain I feel, and how exposed to hundreds of chances. Avoiding forbidden ground, as you did just now, I may still say that on the constancy of one person, naming no person, all my expectations depend, and at the best, how indefinite and unsatisfactory, only to know so vaguely what they are. In saying this, I relieved my mind of what had always been there, more or less, though no doubt most since yesterday. Now, Handel, Herbert replied in his gay, hopeful way, it seems to me that, in the despondency of the tender passion, we are looking into our gift horse's mouth with a magnifying glass. Likewise, it seems to me that, concentrating our attention on the examination, we altogether overlook one of the best points of the animal. Didn't you tell me that your guardian, Mr. Jaggers, told you in the beginning that you were not endowed with expectations only? And even if he had not told you so, though that is a very large if, I grant, could you believe that of all men in London, Mr. Jaggers is the man to hold his present relations towards you unless he were sure of his ground? I said I could not deny that this was a strong point. I said it—people often do in such cases— like a rather reluctant concession to truth and justice, as if I wanted to deny it. "I should think it was a strong point," said Herbert, "and I should think you would be puzzled to imagine a stronger. As to the rest, you must bide your guardian's time, and he must bide his client's time. You'll be 1 and 20 before you know where you are, and then perhaps you'll get some further enlightenment. At all events, you'll be nearer getting it, for it must come at last." "What a hopeful disposition you have!" said I, gratefully admiring his cheery ways. "I ought to have," said Herbert, "for I have not much else. I must acknowledge, by the by, that the good sense of what I have just said is not my own, but my father's. The only remark I ever heard him make on your story was the final one, 'The thing is settled and done, or Mr. Jaggers would not be in it.' And now before I say anything more about my father, or my father's son, and repay confidence with confidence, I want to make myself seriously disagreeable to you for a moment, positively repulsive." "You won't succeed," said I. "Oh, yes, I shall," said he. "1, 2, 3, and now I am in for it. Handel, my good fellow," though he spoke in this light tone, he was very much in earnest, "I have been thinking since we have been talking with our feet on this fender, that Estella surely cannot be a condition of your inheritance, if she were never referred to by your guardian. Am I right in so understanding what you have told me, as that he never referred to her, directly or indirectly, in any way? Never even hinted, for instance, that your patron might have views as to your marriage ultimately?" "Never." "Now, Handel, I am quite free from the flavour of sour grapes, upon my soul and honour. Not being bound to her, can you not detach yourself from her? I told you I should be disagreeable." I turned my head aside, for with a rush and a sweep, like the old marsh winds coming up from the sea, a feeling like that which had subdued me on the morning when I left the forge, when the mists were solemnly rising, and when I laid my hand upon the village finger-post, smote upon my heart again. There was silence between us for a little while. "Yes, but my dear Handel," Herbert went on, as if we had been talking instead of silent, "its having been so strongly rooted in the breast of a boy, whose nature and circumstances made so romantic, renders it very serious. Think of her bringing up, and think of Miss Havisham. Think of what she is herself. Now I am repulsive, and you abominate me. This may lead to miserable things." "I know it, Herbert," said I, with my head still turned away, "but I can't help it." "You can't detach yourself?" "No, impossible." "You can't try, Handel?" "No, impossible." "Well," said Herbert, getting up with a lively shake as if he had been asleep, and stirring the fire, "now I'll endeavour to make myself agreeable again." So he went round the room and shook the curtains out, put the chairs in their places, tidied the books and so forth that were lying about, looked into the hall, peeped into the letter-box, shut the door, and came back to his chair by the fire, where he sat down, nursing his left leg in both arms. I was going to say a word or two, Handel, concerning my father and my father's son. I am afraid it is scarcely necessary for my father's son to remark that my father's establishment is not particularly brilliant in its housekeeping. There is always plenty, Herbert, said I, to say something encouraging. Oh, yes, and so the dustman says, I believe, with the strongest approval, and so does the marine store shop in the back street. Gravely, Handel, for the subject is grave enough, you know how it is as well as I do. I suppose there was a time once when my father had not given matters up, but if ever there was, the time is gone. May I ask you if you have ever had an opportunity of remarking, down in your part of the country, that the children of not exactly suitable marriages are always most particularly anxious to be married? This was such a singular question that I asked him in return, "Is it so?" "I don't know," said Herbert, "but that's what I want to know, because it is decidedly the case with us. My poor sister Charlotte, who was next me and died before she was 14, was a striking example. Little Jane is the same. In her desire to be matrimonially established, you might suppose her to have passed her short existence in the perpetual contemplation of domestic bliss. Little Alick in a frock has already made arrangements for his union with a suitable young person at Kew, and indeed I think we are all engaged except the baby." "Then you are?" said I. "I am," said Herbert, "but it's a secret." I assured him of my keeping the secret, and begged to be favoured with further particulars. He had spoken so sensibly and feelingly of my weakness that I wanted to know something about his strength. "May I ask the name?" I said. "Name of Clara," said Herbert. "Live in London?" "Yes. Perhaps I ought to mention," said Herbert, who had become curiously crestfallen and meek since we entered on the interesting theme, "that she is rather below my mother's nonsensical family notions. Her father had to do with the victualling of passenger ships. I think he was a species of purser." "What is he now?" said I. "He's an invalid now," replied Herbert. "Living on—" "On the first floor," said Herbert, which was not at all what I meant, for I had intended my question to apply to his means. "I have never seen him, for he has always kept his room overhead since I have known Clara, but I have heard him constantly. He makes tremendous rows, roars, and pegs at the floor with some frightful instrument." In looking at me, and then laughing heartily, Herbert for the time recovered his usual lively manner. "Don't you expect to see him?" said I. "Oh, yes, I constantly expect to see him," returned Herbert, "because I never hear him without expecting him to come tumbling through the ceiling. But I don't know how long the rafters may hold." When he had once more laughed heartily, he became meek again, and told me that the moment he began to realize capital, it was his intention to marry this young lady. He added as a self-evident proposition, engendering low spirits, "But you can't marry, you know, when you're looking about you." As we contemplated the fire, and as I thought what a difficult vision to realize this same capital sometimes was, I put my hands in my pockets. A folded piece of paper in one of them attracting my attention, I opened it and found it to be the playbill I had received from Joe, relative to the celebrated provincial amateur of Roscian renown. And bless my heart, I involuntarily added aloud, it's tonight. This changed the subject in an instant, and made us hurriedly resolve to go to the play. So, when I had pledged myself to comfort and abet Herbert in the affair of his heart by all practicable and impracticable means, and when Herbert had told me that his affianced already knew me by reputation, and that I should be presented to her, and when we had warmly shaken hands upon our mutual confidence, we blew out our candles, made up our fire, locked our door, and issued forth in quest of Mr. Wopsle and Denmark. End of chapter.